Hello, everyone, and welcome to the recap of our PWX 2024 presentation. Do you know, or are you guessing? I delivered this presentation in Atlanta at PWX 2024, and afterwards, we had many people stopping by the booth asking if there was a version they could share with colleagues, or maybe they were unable to attend the live presentation in person. So for the next few minutes, I will do my best to provide a quick recap of the presentation, and I would encourage you to reach out afterwards, and we can go into more depth about any of the topics we touch on that you find interesting. Also, feel free to pause as we go through. There will be a few QR codes so you can get additional information and more depth on some of these topics. My name is Chris DeJuneas. I'm one of the solution consultants here with Brightly. I work extensively with our government and education clients across our different platforms. We won't have time to go into full detail on all of our agenda items in the limited time we have today, but we will briefly touch on each of these learning objectives. And again, I'm happy to continue this conversation in follow-up webcasts. But to connect these dots for you, we're going to start off today's conversation discussing what you own, facts versus feelings, which is another way to put the title of this presentation, Do You Know or Are You Guessing? And using those established facts to elevate and change the story that you're telling to leadership. So in order to start telling our story using facts instead of feelings, we really are going to focus on these three pillars. And these are the same three pillars I use in most of the asset management discussions that I have here at Brightly with our clients. The foundation for the discussion is really going to be that central pillar, the asset register. Not only does it play a role in the day-to-day operation, but it's going to inform your annual decisions, your degradation modeling, and any simulations you may be trying to do from a long-term outlook. So when we talk about the asset register, and I got a lot of hand raises on this at PWX during the presentation, but most people, their mind goes to something like this, that spreadsheet of doom, as we often hear it called. And I'm here to tell you it's a good starting point when you're building out the foundations of your asset management journey. But what we're really talking about when we say an asset register is something more centralized, a true register that we can take action on, right? That we can start evaluating trends on based off the data that we're tying to this register. And there's a lot of different strategies for going about centralizing what you own and getting it into an asset register versus just I'm going to call it a generic spreadsheet. So a few of those strategies that we discussed, and we went into more depth at the presentation, but first of all, spreadsheets are floating around your organization. Even if you have not seen them, think about starting with finance for a list of capital assets, if we're talking about facilities side of the equation, for example, because those do exist, and that's going to give you a good starting point for building that register. If you already own a CMMS or asset management tool like Brightly's Asset Essentials, any legitimate tool like that is going to give your technicians and operators in the field the opportunity to create assets and add to that register as they go. This is a really productive way to get them to know more about your capital assets as part of the preventative maintenance or PM process. And then obviously, no asset management and register build out discussion would be complete without discussing third parties. Obviously, a number of different partner opportunities out there for you to have boots on the ground. From a facility standpoint, something like a facility condition assessment is pretty common. Not only capturing the systems and components within the structures and the envelopes, but if we look at the top portion here, making sure that when you have these services provided, you're getting your planned maintenance schedules built into the tool as part of the process. As we continue on here with those three pillars, you can see why it's so important to get the PMs associated to what you own. Because when we know what we own, that allows us to move to the left or the right pillars. And in our conversation today, we are going to encompass both of the outer pillars briefly, and again, we can dive more into this in later discussions and webcast. But looking at that left pillar, we know what we own. Now it's time to tie the work we're doing back to those capital assets and infrastructure. And namely in the form of PMs is a pretty good starting point. That way we can start look at what we're spending annually from a planned maintenance standpoint versus an unplanned maintenance standpoint. And that brings us to really one of our first feelings that we discussed while we were in Atlanta during PWX. We need to get away from these types of statements. I feel like we're always repairing this chiller. It seems like we're repairing this more often than we used to, right? We want to move away from this to a more fact-based approach. Our asset health trends are showing a 20% increase in annual spending and a 30% increase in unplanned downtime for this chiller. Which one of those statements do you think is going to be more impactful to leaderships that are helping establish these budgets? Especially in a time when our leaders are looking different than they ever have before, in a sense of where their backgrounds are. People coming from the private sector are a lot less likely to have come up through planning, public works, zoning, and have familiarity with your world. So being able to transition our statements to more of these fact-based statements is a great way to change the story and get the attention of these new era of leaders that we have to work with. So how do we do this? How do we move from these two feeling-based statements, right, to more of a fact-based approach? Well, in our previous 3 pillars, we talked about tying our work we're doing to what we own. And there's a reason we do that. It's not just to keep our technicians busy, right? You can't see me laughing right now. They could in person, so it's a little awkward. But anyway, these are 4 trends that we evaluate when it comes to the health of our capital assets, right? These 4 different components, you'll notice, are all derived from that left pillar and tying it back to what we own. Caveats here, you do need to have, I would say, minimum of 10 work orders tied to a capital asset and at least 12 months of history before you start looking at these trends and putting a lot of stock in them. Now, non-PM trend, right? We're going to look at that. How are things trending from an unplanned standpoint over the past year? Do we see tick ups in certain items during seasonality based off of the type of assets we're talking about? How long is it taking to close reactive, unplanned work orders? Right? Apply the same thing to the even more critical work that's being done, those emergency repairs that have to be done. As long as you're as long as you are putting the correct priorities, that's going to elevate that reactive, unplanned type of trend. Below that are PM trends, right? Preventative maintenance. When we look at something as simple as the status of a PM, it gives us a wealth of data. I hear so often about how PMs get pushed to the back burner because the emergencies need to be addressed. Well, if you just have PMs created and sitting around in a status that's not being completed, there's a lot of good trends and value you can derive and report on from that. So just having these completed, even if we're not following through, having a system that can analyze that for us and flag it is key. And then finally, the recent work order cost, right? And that's just not materials. We're going to look at labor and convert labor hours to labor costs simply based off of the wage of technicians. Okay. So again, we're moving a little quick here, but with those 4 trends in mind, what can we do with that? What does this visually look like when we have the technology to support the decisions? This is the portion where we talk about elevating the story when we go back to our initial 3 learning objectives. Now, in this screenshot, you'll see I have risk being categorized in my assets based off of low risk assets, medium risk assets, and high risk assets. And in this dashboard, it's very easy for me to pick up a list of those medium risk assets based off of that green, amber, red color change. So I could select any one of these medium risk assets, let's say this chiller. Okay, the analytics have evaluated that there's risk going on here. The next question should be why. Okay. So if we drill in and look into the chiller itself and look at those 4 key components that we just talked about in the prior slide, we can see 2 of our 4 trends have been flagged as unfavorable. That is indicating why that chiller's moved from low risk to medium risk, giving us a compelling fact-based story to share with leadership. Our non-PM trends, our unplanned maintenance trends, there's been a higher incidence of unplanned work on this capital asset in the past few months. And it's a double whammy. Those unplanned work orders are actually taking longer to complete than we've historically seen. And then we look to the right of that. It's not a coincidence. These 2 are always linked, right? Recent preventative maintenance work orders have taken longer to complete. Again, a compelling fact-based story. The last feeling we'll wrap up here with our brief recap is one of my favorites. Does this sound familiar to anyone? I feel like we are too reactive or we need to be more proactive. In the 10 plus years I've been with Brightly doing this is the number one comment I hear on webcast or doing in-person presentations. How do we change this feeling statement to a fact-based compelling one? This chiller's on track to last 3 less years than manufacturer expected life because we have neglected the proper PM schedules. That is a powerful, compelling statement, and that ties in with that right pillar, life cycle modeling. There are numerous values that can be used to help you tell that story, to help you visualize and bring a fact-based approach. We won't have time to jump into net present value today or return on investment, but I did want to share with you a few resources. Again, please pause these screens, scan the QR codes, dive into the additional details. These are going to give you a lot of good ammunition for telling that story in a more fact-based instead of feelings approach. And after you listen to this today, again, please reach out because I would love the opportunity to show you how we're able to take your maintenance logs, your preventative maintenance records, and apply them to the capital assets and show, like you see highlighted in yellow on this slide. Look at the second option first, end of useful life date, straight line. So based on manufacturer guidelines, this particular capital asset should last 3 years and 10 months longer. Based off of the line item above it, the adjusted useful life, that is being adjusted based off of the lack of PMs and reactive work that we're doing in a timely manner on this asset. We have cost ourselves 3 years, and if you look down to annual PM hours, that's largely because we're doing less than 5 hours annually on this particular piece of equipment. And when you apply that out against everything in your portfolio, you can quickly see how it adds up. So again, thank you for the recap, or for the time to do this recap here today. I would really appreciate the opportunity to speak more in depth with you, tying these 3 pillars together so you have a compelling fact-based story and move away from those feelings. Again, this is Chris DeJuneas with Brightly. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you.